Hello there, Lou from Spitfire Audio here. Thanks for joining me for another back to school live stream. Now, all of the products I'm going to be showing off today are currently 50% off as part of our back to school sale, so make sure you check out our website and get your hands on them. Today I'm going to be taking you through how to write a tense and dramatic piece of music using Albion 1, Eric Whitacre choir and symphonic strings. The bit of music I'm about to show you is actually a cue from the first short film I've ever scored, reworked using these libraries, and I've got to say it sounds significantly better. Without further ado, here's the piece of music. The intro of the piece starts with quite an ambient textural bed, and the original cue actually began with a guitar, a distorted guitar playing tremolo. So to replicate this with more of an orchestral sound, I use the symphonic strings ensemble patch, picking the tremolo articulation. And as you can hear, it sort of drones throughout the whole piece. I also made sure to automate the modulation and expression to get it sort of swelling up and building up as the piece continues to progress. So here's how that sounds. I've also used a bit of the Eric Whitacre choir Evo Grid to help bring in some of that space and texture I was talking about. And I've pegged in the dynamic swell evolution on the G here. So if you take a look at the bottom left of the UI, you can see kind of what evolution you're getting at what key center. So here's how this one sounds. Quite nice to sustain these notes just to hear how the evolution develops. Because I've added a little bit of reverb as well, you really get a sense of space. Now we're introducing an Albion 1 synth called Clarinet, coupled with a couple of more symphonic string patches. These two are bass patches with the collegno articulation, and both this Albion 1 synth and the collegno strings add a sort of percussive element to the piece, which was really cool. So here's how the collegno strings sound. So as you can hear, it's quite sensitive to velocity, and on both these bass tracks I've actually added a stereo delay as well, just to help create some of that ambient sort of space and room. And here's the plucked clarinet patch from Albion 1 with the rest of our instruments. And as you can hear, that sound is quite subtle but effective in the piece, and I've used the expression here to just fade that in. I didn't want any of this sort of percussion section, if you can call it that, to be too overpowering at the beginning. It was all meant to build tension as more and more layers were being added to the piece. We've also got another Albion 1 synth here called Waves of Intrigue, and similarly to the tremolo patch at the start, it acts as a sort of drone, and it's got this really nice pulsing rhythm to it. So let me show you what that sounds like. And you can hear that sound really complements our growing percussion section well, as the swells in it sort of help build up that sense of suspense and tension. And you can control these swells within the UI. So what I've done here is I've made sure I've oscillated the mixer, I've turned that on, and then I've set the speed at which it oscillates between the two sounds here. I've set that to 16, I thought that was quite a nice rate at which it transitions between both sounds in the mix. In the whole piece there are two of these drones using the Waves of Intrigue patch. The first one near the introduction, pan to the left, and the second one in the climactic finish of the piece, pan to the right. And around this time, I'm also using the symphonic strings patches. So I've got a cello and viola patch playing together these little string passages, swelling in and out to hint at some chords that are introduced more prominently later in the piece. Now I'm using the consort articulation for both of these patches to help deliver a softer, warmer tone as the tension builds in the introduction. So here's how I've used them. Now with most of the symphonic strings patches, I've tried to pan them according to their orchestral seating arrangement. With these two, I've tried to sort of naturally automate the dynamics and expression to help create that swell. Now we're at a really important part of the piece. We've got the introduction of our bass line, and that is in our symphonic strings bass. I'm using the pizzicato articulation here to help those notes really stick out and be a lot bolder. And I've also got an Albion 1 patch called Epic Sonar Pluck. It's another synth patch. I tend to, with a lot of the symphonic string sections, and actually with the choir section that's introduced later, double it up with maybe one or two Albion 1 synth patches just to add another layer and a bit of edge to the piece. Taking a look at the MIDI, we can see that the bass patch is playing this short rhythmical sequence, which is why the pizzicato articulation was so important to help outline this rhythm. Now with the Albion 1 synth patch, Epic Sonar Pluck, it's playing the exact same thing, however the notes are sustained because the patch itself, similar to the Waves of Intrigue patch, has its own sort of pulse, so it wasn't necessary to copy the exact rhythm, and it made for quite an interesting contrast. So here's how both bass parts sound together. For the basses, I've also tweaked the mic mix within the UI. I've brought the mics really close to help give a sort of claustrophobic feel, as well as separating the bass from other sounds, as I really wanted to highlight this instrument. As the bass line's establishing itself, our consort strings fade out as this new high drones are introduced, so the texture isn't too thick before we begin our climactic section. Making full use of the Eric Whitacre Choir Evo grid, I've got a couple of unique, ethereal sounding high-pitched drones, as well as another Albion 1 patch called Miners Choir. For now, we're going to focus on the Eric Whitacre Choir Evos, as the Miners Choir patch plays a really important role in closing the piece. So the two Evos I've selected are Long Evo Ricochet and Long Evo Harmonic. So here's how they both sound together. You can hear that ethereal sound I was talking about. Now we've got our consort strings being introduced again with another track, a higher sort of ensemble line to help ramp the piece up to its bold moment. Now while this is happening, we finally get to introduce our Albion 1 percussion. So we've got our Darwin percussion ensemble. I'm using the high sticks here. We've also got our double XL percussion and our Easter Island percussion. So let me play the piece from this point again and keep an eye out for the percussion. Pretty cool stuff. Now taking a look at the Darwin percussion ensemble, I'm using high sticks here and they act as a sort of hi-hat for the piece. Again, I've got that fading in using the expression, and with all of the percussion it was really important for me to control the velocity. So taking a look at the MIDI here, I've got the velocity increased on the note on each beat of the bar to help accent sort of where the rhythm starts. And taking a look at the double XL, I'm using bins here and I've got the middle note of that little rhythmic phrase accented as well. And with the Easter Island percussion, it's again playing a similar rhythm without the middle note, just helping to bolster up the double XL percussion after introducing both those tracks into the piece. Now when the percussion entered, you may have heard a new string line enter, and it's just playing a little sequence restricted to a minor third, and that's using our symphonic strings violin legato patch. Now as well as this, like I mentioned with the Albion 1 patches doubling up some of our symphonic strings, I've actually got two here. The first one called Celestation 3, and here's how that sounds. Kind of like a spooky sort of whistle sound. And the next patch is called Organic Drone. And the mod wheel on this actually controls whether you hear an octave ringing out above the note that you're playing. So it sounds like this. So by this point, we're now in the climactic section of the music. And as well as this line being introduced, we have our main melody line split across 3 different violin legato patches. So I'll solo those out so you can hear how they sound. You get these super realistic transitions with the legato patches, which is why you want to tend to use them for more melodic or solo lines with the symphonic strings. I especially liked in this how the violin 2 legato transition between that higher E flat to the A flat. I really like that slide there. So let me just play that again for you. It really is fantastic. And now we're finally introducing our Eric Whitacre choir library in the climactic section of the piece, as well as another Albion 1 synth called Hollow Waves. Taking a look at the MIDI here, we can see that Hollow Waves is comprised of all of the Eric Whitacre choir tracks squished into one, which was initially how I recorded the whole choir section. So I just played in the chords and then divvied up each line and gave a voice to it. And then within that, I gave specific notes different voicings. So for example, taking a look at the top line here, the first couple of notes of this tenor are singing R's, and then there's some O's, there's an O there. And if I click on that, we can look in the UI at the all-in-one patch, and you can see the amount of different voicings you can give. And within the UI as well, you can separate that between different sections of the choir. So this is mostly a male choir. I'm just using tenor and bass voices here, but you've obviously got your soprano and altos in there as well. Similarly with the strings, I'm also automating the dynamics and expression as well to help create a bit of realism and to help fade them out towards the end. So here's how they all sound with the Hollow Waves patch all together. You can hear the Hollow Waves patch has a nice sort of rumbly, breathy characteristic to it. Now as we draw to a close, our symphonic strings and our choir libraries sort of fade out and taper off until we're left with some of the synths and our percussion. And there's one extremely prominent synth sound that helps bring this piece to a close, which was introduced back with our high Eric Whittaker choir Evo drones, and that is the Miners Choir. So let's take a listen to that. I mean, what a wonderful sort of harmonically rich, evolving sound to end the piece on. You can see here that pans off to the right towards the end of the piece, and we've got our two waves of Intrigue drones panning off to the left. Now, production-wise, apart from the panning, I've added a couple of reverbs here. So we've got the Lexicon 224, which I use quite a bit, and also the EMT 140 plate reverb, again, to help create space and separate the instruments out. I hope you enjoy these amazing products, and thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.